Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special Halloween rambling. I figured for the occasion, I might as well do something special. It's something I actually meant to do last year but never got around to it. For the occasion, I decided to finally take a peek at the Hellsing manga. I've read the whole thing, and I'm here today to talk about it. So, before I get into that, of course, if you're a new viewer, or if you're just someone who watches my content and you're not subscribed, you might as well to help us reach our goal of hitting 4,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I guarantee if everyone watching this who wasn't subscribed hit that subscribe button, we'd hit our goal in no time. So, I think I should probably give a little bit of my personal background surrounding Hellsing. Because this series, this, franchise in general, is actually very important to me, and very important to this channel. Because Hellsing Ultimate, the OVA adaptation of the manga, was one of the first anime that I ever watched. I think I saw the Team 4-Star Abridged series, and then wanted to see the rest of the story. So I went and I watched the English dub of Hellsing Ultimate, which is one of the best English dubs ever, by the way. If you haven't watched Hellsing Ultimate, watch it with the dub. It is the best way to watch it. It's one of those. It's like Full Metal Alchemist. You must watch the dub. It is so good. But Hellsing Ultimate was one of the first anime I ever watched. I absolutely adored it. And it's largely because of that series that I ended up getting into anime, and then manga, and then, well, that's kind of how we ended up here today. So if it weren't for Hellsing, this channel would probably not exist, and you wouldn't be watching this video right now. So, yeah, that's just kind of an interesting little thing. Now, the story of Hellsing is relatively simple, at least starting off. You've got Alucard, he's a vampire, he hunts other vampires on behalf of the Hellsing organization, a monster hunting group that works for the British government that's been run by the Hellsing family for generations. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Alucard's a vampire, he hunts other vampires, he gets into conflict with the Catholic Church as well, because the Catholic Church are also vampire hunters, and, you know, the English Church does not have a good history with the Vatican, so, you know, that's just kind of the basis for the story. That's kind of the gist of it that you get just from the first volume of the manga. And then it gets more complicated from there, as Hellsing comes into conflict with Millennium, which is, get this, a remnant of the Nazi military that has been turning their members into vampires and wants to have one last war with Alucard and Hellsing and England. Which sounds really batshit insane when you go from, oh yeah, we have a vampire who hunts vampires, and then we have Nazi vampires going to war with England and the Vatican. Gets a little nuts. But when you actually read it, kind of makes perfect sense, really. None of it feels like super crazy when you get into it. And the plot gets, well, as you can imagine, once you have the conspiracy with 50-year-old Nazi vampires, it gets a little more complicated. About half of the story is actually the Battle of London, and it feels much longer in the OVA. In the manga, it doesn't actually start until, like, the end of Volume 5, so it doesn't feel quite as long. It doesn't feel like it takes up quite as much. It feels like the third act of the story is most of the series. But I thought the pacing was pretty much fine here. It's interesting to see how the story in the OVAs sort of overlaps with the individual volumes. Because pretty much the first volume of the manga is the first episode of the OVA, pretty much. But then, as you go along, like, Volume 2 bleeds very heavily into Episode 3 of the OVA, and then so on up until, like, Volume 9? Volume 9 pretty much lines up almost perfectly with Episode 9, and then sort of bleeds into 10. So it's just kind of interesting to see how that works out. But the overall plot pretty good. Simple, very solid. For the first 5 volumes, I guess, it's basically, oh, Alucard goes and kills a vampire that has maybe some kind of special power, or he fights Anderson in the first episode. There's usually kind of like a villain of the week thing for each volume. You have Anderson, then you got the Valentine brothers, then you've got the Dandy Man, then you've got Rip Van Winkle, and then after that point, it's just kind of Alucard fights everyone, and then Ceres fights Zoran at the mansion. And then even after that, it's a very sort of villain of the week style thing with the antagonists, but it works really well. It's basically, how well is this person going to go against Alucard? Because basically the entire story revolves around people trying to kill Alucard, because, well, I guess we'll get into that when I talk about Alucard as a protagonist, because his dynamic in the series is very interesting and unique for, I'd say probably most anime protagonists in general. Anyway, next important thing, the art. I was actually kind of surprised by the art in the manga, because at least starting off, it felt kind of different from the anime. A lot of the art is much darker, it's much grittier. Actually reading Hellsing, at least earlier on, it feels much more like a horror manga than Ultimate. Ultimate for me always felt much more like an action thing with horror elements. It's like Resident Evil. But a lot of the stuff from like the first volume is like genuinely pretty spooky, especially when Alucard goes to like level 1 release, especially his fight with Luke Valentine. I thought was a lot freakier in the manga than it was in the anime, and I think maybe that's just because when you have everything on a still image, it's much easier to comprehend everything, sort of take in all the detail and stuff. I noticed the art in this manga, it's the type of art where most of the time there is like a certain level of detail, but then when they do spreads, it goes absolutely fucking apeshit with having detail on stuff for the spreads, especially when Alucard goes level 1 and all the freaky shit starts happening. Oof. That's when some of the detail gets really high, and the author Hirano is very good at drawing creepy shit, especially for Alucard. The visuals for when he destroyed Luke Valentine, and then when he attacked the naval ship, when he had like all of the arms and stuff coming out, it was so goddamn creepy. Alucard is genuinely very scary when he needs to be, and that's very good. Now, earlier on in the series, there was something kind of weird with the art style. It was like the feet and hands of characters felt way too big, like they had bigger arms and stuff. I'm not sure what it was, because I'm used to the Ultimate art style for the anime, or I guess the OVA. I haven't watched the 90s anime. Is that in the 90s? I think that started in the 90s, didn't it? I don't know, I haven't watched the original anime. Everyone looks like very slim, very slender. The proportions for most of the characters look very normal. So then when I go into the manga, I'm like, why are Anderson's like hands and arms so wide? It's strange. But then that didn't seem to really be a thing anymore by the time the series was getting closer to the end. It was mostly just like an evolution in the art style. That always happens with manga artists. Now one actual like kind of complaint that I have was something weird that they started doing in the later parts of the manga, which was they started intentionally splitting up spreads. They never did that before. All of the spreads, there was no break in them, and then there were. And this isn't like, I don't know, like Berserk, where the way that they scanned the spreads, they didn't bother putting the 2 pages together, so there's just a big white line going through it. No, the spreads are separate panels here. You'll have a spread that's split up into like 2 or 3 separate panels, and I don't understand why. I assume the author knew how, like, I know the reason there's the white line, sometimes they split up the spreads, is so that when you're holding the physical manga volume, the spread isn't all like crushed in on itself in the middle. So by having the space in there, when you hold out the pages, you can see the whole spread. There's nothing cut off. But then when you're reading it digitally, like I am, because I don't have the money or means to go out and buy all the manga volumes for stuff that I read, it looks weird. I don't know. It's a weird thing. I've never seen anything like it in any series I've read. It's very strange. But that's pretty much the only actual complaint I have about the art. Rest of it, there are many panels that I would put up on a wall. I would print them out, or I would buy a poster and I would put them on a wall if I could. Very nice stuff. Now, there are a few differences between the anime. I should probably say OVA. I don't know, to me, Ultimate is the anime because it's the actual complete adaptation of the story. The original anime went off and did its own thing because the manga was not anywhere near finished as far as I'm aware. There are a couple differences. There are a few differences, as I mentioned, in the pacing between the volumes and the OVA episodes, but that's just more so what did they choose to adapt per episode. There are a few differences in, like, the dialogue and stuff, but that's because I watched the English dub. I'm pretty sure if I watched the sub, a lot of the lines would be the same. By the way, the English dub, in my opinion, I think the reason I like it more is I think the lines in the dub are actually better than they are in the sub. Of course, you have Crispin Freeman's voice, which is just the best. It's just the best. When I read this, I hear it in the voices of the dub VAs. They're just wonderful. But some of the lines in the dub hit way harder than they did in the manga here. I don't have any really specific examples. Just imagine like a lot of the big speeches and stuff, like Anderson's last words, and various speeches that the Major did. They just felt more impactful with the lines that they used in the dub than they did in here. But they're still good. Another thing is that in this manga, they write the dialect. They write the accents of the characters. Bernadotte, his dialogue is written like a French person speaking English. The Nazis, they sound German. All of the W's are V's. All the V's are W's. And Anderson, oh my god. His accent is so heavy. They write his dialogue so Irish, it's like he's speaking another language. I can barely understand some of his lines. It's nuts. It's crazy. It's just funny, like, I have to actually, like, say his lines out loud to make sure that I understand what the fuck he's saying. It's kind of funny, but it's a nice touch. Another reason the Hellsing dub is so good is because, well, all of the characters are speaking the languages that they should be with where they're from, and they sound like they're from where they're from. Anderson sounds Irish. The Brits, like Integra, they sound British. The Nazis sound German. Dudes from the Vatican, like Maxwell, they sound like they're from Italy. So, I just appreciate that. And I would say the most notable difference between the anime and the manga is that the manga has these bonus chapters about Heinkel and Yumi, which I had no idea about, and they're actually a very, very nice touch. Because in the OVA, Heinkel and Yumi are very side characters. They have very little importance in the plot until, like, episode 8? And even then, they're not really important until episode 9. So it's actually really nice to have more context for their characters. I care more about them. I know more about them. So then, as a result, what ends up happening later is way more impactful. And it's also just kind of cool to see the Vatican doing stuff as well, because we know that the Vatican kind of does like the same thing Hellsing does and more, but we never really get to see much of it. So these bonus chapters with Heinkel and Yumi give us a better idea of what the Vatican Section 13 is actually doing, instead of just Anderson occasionally going and trying to have fights with Alucard. It's quite nice. I appreciate it quite a lot. Now then, next thing, the biggest plus for Hellsing, honestly. You all know it, rule of cool. Hellsing is so goddamn cool. Like, holy shit. It may be one of the coolest things that I've ever read, just through the sheer style. All of the characters are stylish as hell. They fight in cool ways. They have cool personalities. The voice actors in the OVA are cool as shit. Like, they just sound good. But that's not much of a factor here. But I can't not bring up Ultimate. Fights are cool, powers are cool, everything is so goddamn cool. Anything else is really not that important. Hellsing could have like a very meh plot or meh writing, and the coolness factor would entirely make up for it. Like, it's just so goddamn nice to look at. It just makes you feel, fuck, that's so cool. Alucard's giant guns, his awesome outfit. Anderson is awesome as shit. Walter might be the coolest character in Hellsing, which is saying a lot, because you have characters like Alucard and Anderson and the Captain. The Captain. Don't quote me on this, but the Captain may be the coolest Nazi ever. I mean, holy shit. Although his guns are dumb. They're dumb as shit. I mean, you just look at the way he has to hold them when he shoots someone at point-blank range, like you're supposed to be able to do with a handgun. And it's just like, a human being could not use these. You would break your fucking wrist trying to use them. But he's the captain, and he thinks it's cool, so it's cool. But fortunately, the plot of Hellsing is quite good. It has very good writing, so the extra coolness factor added onto that just makes it even better. I mean, let's be real here, people. Hellsing's at least a 9 out of 10. It may be higher. There aren't really any serious problems with it. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention, differences between the anime and manga. I knew I was missing something. The comedic moments are actually funny in the manga. There's just something about them. Something about the way that they did them in the OVA just made them feel kind of cringe. They're kind of cringy. I don't know what it was, but it just wasn't very funny for the most part. I mean, like, it was funny when Schrodinger lost his little handbook thing and he had to share with the captain. That was good in the OVA. But a lot of it just kind of fell flat. Whereas the comedy in the manga I felt was actually really good. But yeah. Anyway, time to talk about Alucard, because basically the entire universe in Hellsing revolves around Alucard. This night-walking, fine-dressing, gunslinging, fuck-mothering vampire is unquestionably the most powerful character in the series, and he's our main character. So that's a little bit of a difficult dynamic to work with there. There are some other series where the main character is the strongest character, and it doesn't really work so well. Solo Leveling has some problems with that. Mostly in the second season, it has some real problems with that. One Punch Man does it in such a way where Saitama is not really the main focus of anything. He's just kind of a guy that shows up sometimes. A lot of the focus is actually put on the other characters doing stuff. The way it's handled here is that the usual dilemma is not, oh my god, how will we defeat this vampire, Catholic priest, werewolf, whatever. The dynamic is, oh, the bad guys are doing some shit, and they're trying to kill Alucard. Let's see how that works out for them. It's, oh boy, more dumb motherfuckers are trying to kill Alucard again. Let's see how well that goes for them. And it usually doesn't go that well, but in very gory and entertaining fashion. So the entire plot of the main villains is trying to kill Alucard. Everything. 50 years of planning to try and figure out a way to kill Alucard. That's a pretty good dynamic to have, because it's not really just, oh, we got a new strong guy, let's see if he's strong enough to beat Alucard. It's every individual battle that happens is part of a series of events that are part of a grand plan to eventually beat Alucard. He is the main protagonist, but at the same time he's almost like the main antagonist, and that pretty much almost everyone is trying to figure out a way to kill him. Are they successful in that? Well, we can talk about that in a minute, because I'm going to actually get into heavy spoilers talking about sort of the themes of the series and stuff. So, before we get into that, I figure a good way to scare off some of you who may not listen to the spoiler warning is to do a little shout out to my patrons. I know, terrifying. Special thanks to Fuse, Neo, Dijon Redden, Anthony Chavez, Honey Mustard, Zach Rowitz, K-God, Chris Redfield, Scratch23, Rat, Ryzen 4K, Artist, Mac Campaign, Wave of Manga, Sam the Ace, and Chuck's Feed and Seed. Thank you all very much for supporting me on Patreon. I greatly appreciate it. And if you too want to get a shout out at some point during videos, or access to reviews for Soul Leveling and the Boxer, you can always become a patron as well. Please link to my Patreon down in the description. Hey, isn't it funny how this is like the third thing I've done of rambling on with Hell in the title? First it was Helper, then Hell's Paradise, and now Hellsing. Just kind of a weird coincidence. Oh, and one more thing I just thought of. This is a rambling after all, so it's not going to be super organized. But it is kind of neat how Hellsing kind of has, like, the big classic monsters in it. You've, of course, got vampires, you got zombies, you got werewolves, and I think Anderson is technically like a homunculus, so I guess you could say he's kind of like Frankenstein's monster, if Frankenstein's monster was a vampire-hunting Catholic priest. Now, speaking of monsters, one of the biggest running themes in Hellsing is that of immortality and what it means to be a real monster. Because there are a lot of monsters, quote-unquote, in Hellsing, and that's mostly the artificial vampires created by Millennium, but everyone's like, those aren't real monsters. Alucard, Anderson after, striking his own heart with Helena's nail, or the Captain. Those guys are real monsters. They're not artificial. They're the real deal. And what exactly does that mean to be like a real monster? Well, as far as we can tell, it entails some kind of immortality, because that seems to be some kind of a running theme with them. Of course, there's no actual immortal in Hellsing. That's another thing. There's no such thing as something that actually cannot be killed. Except for Alucard, I guess. I guess Alucard could technically kill himself by the time the end of the series came around. But that's about it. Though I suppose becoming like an omnipresent being is a little bit different than being the type of monster that he was before. But Hellsing is another series where being immortal sucks. That's a pretty consistent theme I find in a lot of, like, Eastern media, is that living forever is actually the worst. It's kind of shit. And Hellsing has a pretty good way of explaining why. For starters, people that become these immortal monsters give up everything. Alucard used to be a king, and through becoming a vampire, everything that it took for him to become what it is now, he lost everything. He has no subjects, no castle, no kingdom. He has nothing left. He is an empty, aimless being who, without the Hellsing organization, would just wander the earth for all of time until maybe someone eventually killed him. It's a pretty pitiful, meaningless existence. There is no purpose when you become a monster. There's nothing for you to strive for, there's no struggle, there's no willpower required to survive, you're just kind of there. And there's not really much that can be done about it. It's why monsters like the Captain seemingly crave death, because he's probably just been around for centuries and he just has nothing. He's like the rest of Millennium, where they've just kind of been living to die in a final glorious battle. That's what they've been living for. That's why the Major, in part, hates Alucard, because there is no will. There is nothing that Alucard continues to exist for, yet he's perfect. He is a perfect, almost undying opponent for the Major to wage his final beautiful war against. And the Major, through science, has managed to survive this long, and it's not for nothing. He doesn't want to just live for no reason. He doesn't want to rely on the blood and lives and souls of other people to exist. He wants to exist of his own accord. And that is what separates him, a man with the trappings of a monster, from Alucard, who is a monster with the trappings of a man. And I must say, the Major really is an absolutely fantastic villain. I think he's one of the best. His speeches are just top tier. He has top tier speeches. I mean, the I love war speech, it's a classic. And many of his other monologues, especially the one talking about his past, are really, really good. And as terrible as he is, the Major is the living embodiment of it. What it means to be a human in Hellsing is to be someone with will, someone with an unstoppable, unshakable will to keep moving forward towards a goal. And that is why the Major is the perfect person to defeat Alucard. He is the only person to defeat Alucard, because he is the only person with the absolute will to defeat him as a human. Only humans can defeat monsters. Only humans can hope to beat monsters. And that's kind of like a double meaning there, because humans have the willpower required to overcome all of the challenges required to truly kill a monster, but also humans are the only beings naive enough to hope that they can kill a monster. That's sort of the idea, is that humans are the only ones with the kind of mentality and spirit needed to kill a being like Alucard. That's why he was defeated in the past by Van Helsing, was because he was the only one who had the will to go through everything required that was needed to beat Alucard, who was then Dracula at the time. And Alucard's probably gotten way stronger than he was since then. It seems like Alucard... They say that he came to England alone when he was defeated by Hellsing. So I assume that it's not really clear. He must have been in level 0, because Alucard can really only be defeated in level 0, because that's when he releases all of the souls within him and he becomes a lone vampire. So I guess he came to London without all of his spirits or something, and that was the type of state he had to be in to be defeated. And the Major's entire plot, basically everything that happens in Hellsing, is the Major trying to get Alucard into that state. And that was the only state in which Anderson and Walter had a chance of beating him. And Anderson did seemingly have a chance to defeat Alucard. Alucard was so excited. He was like, yes, you remind me of those men from that long-forgotten time. You are the type of human who has what it takes to beat me. There are a lot of humans that have no willpower. A lot of the cops that he massacred in Brazil, I mean, one of them shot himself because he was so terrified, and Alucard was pissed because he was a coward in Alucard's mind. He didn't have the will to try and fight him. Alucard would take literally any random asshole with the willpower to try and fight him, and he'd be like, yeah, you're kind of trash, you're kind of fucking garbage, I can beat you very easily, but I respect the effort. But as soon as you pull out some bullshit, like Helena's nail, and you decide to become a monster, that's too far, because monsters are pointless beings. They have no reason, and they have no sort of anything. There's no struggle, there's no willpower, there's nothing driving them on, they just kind of exist. So monsters can't really beat other monsters. I mean, Alucard did kill Anderson, but he was a human again in the end, so I don't know. I've liked the idea that you cannot beat a monster by becoming a monster, because then after that, there is still another monster in this world. But, I mean, when you see when Anderson becomes the monster of God, he's not himself anymore. The very entertaining, lovely, orphan-caring, vampire-hating Catholic priest does not exist anymore. He's just an empty shell. It's just the thorns. There's no Anderson in there anymore. It's just a vessel that's moving on to try and kill the vampire in front of him. He's not there. And that's why he can't beat him. And Walter is kind of an interesting alternate case because he's still himself, but he's not human anymore. And Walter is just kind of fascinating in general because Walter betrays Hellsing, but it wasn't a betrayal in the sense that he really believed in Millennium or Nazism. He's a vampire hunter. Walter's a vampire hunter. He is the best human vampire hunter maybe ever, but he's not the perfect vampire hunter like Alucard is because he gets old. And we see Walter, when he's an old man, is way weaker than Walter after he became a vampire, after he became younger again. And that's just sort of the unfortunate fact of life for human beings, is we age, we get older, we have a prime, and once we're past our prime, there's no going back to it. You can't be as good as you were back then. It's unfortunate. Walter does not abide by the same rules as the usual anime old men, where they just keep getting fucking stronger because they're old. For Walter, being old is a sign that he's become irrelevant, that he's no longer the person that he used to be. He's not as useful as he once was. He's been relegated to a job as the Hellsing family butler. He's not really the angel of death anymore. And he longs for those days of his youth where he was the prized vampire hunter, who wasn't Alucard. And it's really that jealousy of Alucard being the perfect vampire hunter that Walter wishes he could be that leads him to going on that betrayal, to him wanting to beat him, because Alucard is the ultimate prey for Walter. If he can kill the no-life king, the ultimate vampire Alucard, then he is the ultimate vampire hunter. But he fails. Walter does not beat Alucard. The one who beats him is ultimately the Major, who effectively is not really human anymore, but he's still himself. He still has his mind. He does not have to rely on feasting on other people in order to, be immortal. He beats him through using everything that he has at his disposal. And it's very fitting. And the Major pretty much wins in the end. I mean, Alucard comes back 30 years later, so I guess he lost. But in that sense, that would also mean that Professor Hellsing lost, which I don't think he did. He beat Alucard, which no one else had accomplished. So the villain ultimately wins, because he's human. And Alucard is not. And Alucard is not really happy about being a vampire. It seems at many times that he regrets it. He says that he was too weak to bear the weight of a human life. Monsters are weak creatures. They resort to becoming immortal and invincible because they don't have what it takes to survive the hardships of being human. That's why Anderson couldn't beat him in the end. That's why Walter couldn't beat him. And that's why the Major could. It's all very interesting stuff. And it's part of what makes the plot of Hellsing so compelling, is because the monsters don't really like being monsters. It sucks. Being an immortal monster is terrible. They're nothing but pitiful, sobbing children. There is never a good reason that someone becomes a monster. Either they have given up everything for something and they regret it, or they don't achieve it, or they've lost everything. There is nothing left for them. There are not even tears left for them to shed, and they become nothing but lifeless, will-less husks that wander the earth until the end of time. And that's a fairly interesting sort of dynamic to have going for a series about hunting monsters. Hellsing is very simple in premise. You can just kind of... I mean, you could read or watch Hellsing without any of the dialogue and still greatly enjoy it because of how fucking cool and badass it is. But the actual plot of Hellsing is just so good that it really elevates it up to another level. So, yeah, that's most of, like, the organized thoughts I have about Hellsing. That last part was kind of a mess a little bit, but it's a rambling. This isn't like an organized video essay, this is just me kind of saying stuff. Whatever comes to mind, I have, like, a little bit of a list here that I'm going off of. But that's kind of usual. I don't think didn't the last one I do, it was in, like, May or something. It's been a little while. So, that's Hellsing. A very, very good horror action series with a really badass main character who's very well written, some very badass villains who are also very well written. Of course, I didn't really talk about them much in this video, but the supporting characters like Ceres and Integra are very good as well. They really help complete everything. The times when Alucard is gone, you can definitely feel the absence of his presence. But it's not like, oh god, Alucard's gone, I don't give a shit about anything anymore. Because, like, Ceres, Integra, Walter, they're all really good. So, Hellsing, reading the manga for the first time, was still a very enjoyable experience. I would say, ultimately, that, no pun intended, Hellsing Ultimate is the best way to experience Hellsing. It's just adapted so well. The voice acting is great, the animation is wonderful. The only complaint I would have is the comedic moments really aren't that funny in the OVA, and sometimes the choices in OST are a little questionable. But then you have OSTs like Monster of God, and it's just like, oh, yeah. So, if you haven't watched Ultimate, and you're a fan of the manga, watch it. It's probably as good as an adaptation of Hellsing will ever get. If you've only watched Ultimate, I would suggest reading the manga. You don't have to. However, it's still a greatly enjoyable experience. It's nice to look at the source material and kind of see what the differences are, looking at various parts of the anime and seeing how they were adapted, and recognizing how well they were adapted is just kind of an interesting little experience. So, definitely read it if you haven't already. I assume if you haven't read or watched it and you're at this point in the video, why did you watch through this? I told you this would be a big spoiler section. I don't know. But, you know, some people just don't give a shit. It's very entertaining even knowing the spoilers, so you should go read or watch it anyway. But yeah, with that, that's pretty much all I have to say about Hellsing. And that's all for this year's Halloween special. I have no idea what I'll do next year. I saw some people say I should do Soul Eater or something. Maybe. I haven't done a dedicated Tokyo Ghoul video, so maybe if Soul Eater doesn't impress me that much, or if I haven't read it by then, I'll just do a video on Tokyo Ghoul, who knows? But that's a year out from now, so I doubt any of you really care that much. And I know, I'm not super worried about it. We'll see what happens. But I hope you all enjoyed this. I haven't done a rambling in a little bit, so I hope this was fairly entertaining. So, if you enjoyed, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of my uploads. I have a whole playlist full of ramblings. I also do several other series. Consistently, I do reviews, reactions, the occasional discussion video. You can go check those out if you're interested. If you want to talk to me, or you just like talking to other people about Hellsing, or any of the other series that I cover, or really any series, you're welcome to come and check out my Discord server. I have a link to that down in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys around. Happy Halloween. Take care.